Adam Ravenshollow swung down from his horse before the gates had finished groaning open, the seal of his uncle's letter still warm against his palm beneath the leather glove. Mist clung to the autumn fields behind him, low and silvered, and the manor rose out of it like a shape half-remembered from a dream. Ravenshollow, the cursed house his uncle had warned him of in 3 short lines and never explained. One window burned high in the west wing. Every other pane was dark. He pressed his hand to his horse's neck, steadying the animal, steadying himself, and crossed the gravel toward a door he had not seen since he was a boy of 11. He had not yet touched the bell when the door opened. A woman stood in the lamplight, framed by the long shadow of the hall behind her. Dark bronze travelling silk caught the flame and threw it back the colour of brandy. Auburn hair pinned high, a brass key on a black ribbon at her throat. She did not curtsy. She did not smile. "You are late, Your Grace," she said. "The house has been waiting." Adam's hand stilled on the doorframe. He filled it, shoulder to shoulder, the wood pressing his greatcoat, and he saw her note this without flinching. "And so, I am told, have I." She stepped aside. "Come in before the mist follows you." He came in. The hall smelled of beeswax and wood smoke and something older, like old parchment turned in the hand. Candles burned in a brass branch on a side table, too many for a house that received no one. Behind her the staircase climbed into shadow, and somewhere above, a clock ticked with a slow, deliberate authority that made him think of a man counting out a sentence. "Your name." His voice came out clipped, an officer's voice, the only kind he had used for 6 years on a Spanish hillside. "Cordelia Vale." She closed the door behind him. The latch fell with a small, definite sound. "My mother was your uncle's housekeeper. She is no longer living. I have kept the manor since." "Kept it how?" "Standing." She lifted the lamp. "If you will follow me, there is a document the late Duke wished placed in your hand the moment you crossed the threshold. He was very particular about the moment." Adam did not move. He looked past her at a portrait on the wall, a man in a powdered wig, but the face was turned away from the painter, a deliberate 3/4 twist that left only an ear and the line of a jaw. He had seen that portrait as a child and asked about it. No one had answered him then either. "What secret is this house keeping, Miss Vale?" She paused on the second step. The brass key swung once at her throat and settled. Her hazel eyes met his without apology. "More than one, Your Grace, but he will have them in the order the late Duke arranged for you to have them. He was a careful man. The cursed manor he left you is also a careful one." She started up the stairs without waiting to see whether he would follow. He followed. The library was warm. A fire had been laid and lit before his arrival, coals already settled, no smoke, and a single beeswax candle burned at the corner of a great oak desk. On the desk, alone in the center of the blotter, lay a sealed packet bound in black ribbon. Cordelia Vale set the lamp down and stepped back, hands folded, and for the first time, he saw that her fingers were faintly stained with ink at the second knuckles. Capable hands. The hands of a woman who had been writing ledgers an hour ago. "Read it standing or sitting, as it pleases you," she said. "I will wait." Adam broke the seal. The wax was the same wax that had sealed the summoning letter in his glove. A falcon stooping, the Ravenshollow crest. The page inside was in his uncle's hand, narrow and slanted, and at the bottom, witnessed in 3 signatures. He read it once. He read it again. Then he looked up. "This cannot stand." "It can," she said. "It does. The clause is binding." The fire in the grate dropped a coal. The small sound was loud in the room. Adam did not look at the fire. He looked at the page in his hand. He read the sentence a 3rd time, as a soldier reads a brief order he has been given by an officer he does not, on principle, intend to disobey. "It says I must marry the woman entrusted with the seal of Ravenshollow within 30 days, or the estate reverts to the crown." "Yes." He set the page down a 2nd time. He turned the page so that it lay facing her. He set his finger, deliberately, on the line that named the seal. And you hold the seal. She lifted the brass key on its black ribbon. Not the seal itself, he understood, but the key to the cabinet that held it. The same thing, in this house. Her gaze did not waver. I do. He set the page down very carefully on the desk, as a man sets down a primed pistol. He took one step back, because he did not trust himself any closer to the woman who had just put a noose into his hand and asked him to wear it. Miss Vale, I have ridden 3 days from Portsmouth. I have not slept. I have not eaten since Salisbury. I have not in a decade set foot in this house. And you stand in front of me and tell me a man no longer with us has arranged my marriage. I tell you what is written, she said. I did not write it. She had not moved. Her hands were still folded at her waist. The brass key on its black ribbon hung at her throat in the steady candlelight, neither hidden nor lifted. He understood, with the cold, sober part of his mind that had served him in Spain, that she had rehearsed this conversation. She had not rehearsed it once. She had rehearsed it, in the privacy of an empty library, perhaps 100 times. Did you know of it? Yes. Before tonight? A beat. She drew a breath, neither hurried nor reluctant, the breath of a person turning over a card she had been told, 4 years ago, would one night be turned over. For 4 years. The silence that followed was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a room with too many breaths in it. Adam's jaw set. He turned to the window. Outside, the mist had thickened, and he could no longer see the gates he had ridden through. He could see only his own reflection, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, grey-eyed, soldier-built and travel-stained, and behind him, a woman in dark bronze silk, who had been waiting for him for 4 years. At dawn, he said, I ride to London. I will find a solicitor. I will break this clause. You will not break it. Her voice was even. Better men than your London solicitors drafted it. But ride if you wish. I will have a fresh horse ready at 5. He turned. You are very certain, Miss Vale. I have had 4 years to be certain, Your Grace. She inclined her head, just once, and lifted the lamp again. Your room is the east bedchamber. The fire is laid. There is bread and cold mutton on the side table. Salisbury is a long ride. Mrs. Penhaligon has gone to her sister's for the harvest. We are alone in the house tonight, except for the boy in the stables, who sleeps in the loft. Alone, he repeated. Alone. She did not lower her eyes. If that troubles you, Your Grace, I will sleep in the kitchen, with the door bolted from the inside. I have done it before, when travellers came. It troubled him. Not, he realized, in the way she meant. Good night, Miss Vale. Good night, Your Grace. She lifted the lamp. She stepped past him without brushing his sleeve, though the corridor was narrow enough that another woman, in another house, would have. The lamp threw her shadow once along the panelling, and took it with her round the corner of the gallery. He stood a long minute in the empty hall. He did not sleep. He lay above the coverlet, fully dressed, boots off but coat on, and listened to the house. It was not a quiet house. A beam ticked as the fire below it cooled. A shutter knocked once, twice, then settled. Somewhere far off, a fox screamed in the woods, and was answered by a hound he did not yet know the name of. And then, near 3 in the morning, by the long case clock in the corridor, he heard the sound he had been waiting for without knowing it. A door, opening. Soft, deliberate, far away in the east wing. He was up before he had thought about being up. He took the candle from the mantel, lit it at the embers, and pulled the door of his chamber open onto the dark gallery. The candle threw his shadow long against the panelling. He moved without sound, a soldier's habit 6 years deep, and turned the corner of the long gallery, where the portraits stared down with their varnished, knowing eyes. He stopped at the head of the stairs. Cordelia Vale stood 3 steps below him, barefoot, a single candle in her hand, the brass key swinging at her throat. She had a shawl thrown over her nightdress. She had not heard him. She was listening eastward, toward the wing where the door had opened. He watched her for the space of a long breath. Her face in the candlelight was not the face of a woman caught at mischief. It was the face of a woman doing a thing she had done 100 nights running, and meant to do 100 more. Her mouth was set. Her chin was lifted. The hand that held the candle did not tremble. He cleared his throat, very softly. She did not jump. She turned her head, slowly, and looked up at him without surprise, as if she had known, the entire time, that he was there. "Your Grace." "Miss Vale." He came down 2 steps without hurry, so that he would not, by sudden movement, frighten a woman who clearly did not intend to be frightened. The wood was cold under his stockinged feet. The candle on the rail bent, as her candle bent, in a draught from the east that he could now name. "You should be asleep." "You should not be on the gallery in your nightdress at 3 in the morning." "No," she agreed. "I should not." He came down 2 steps. The wood was cold under his stockinged feet. "What was that door?" "A draught," she said. "The east wing latches are old. They give in autumn weather." A long case clock somewhere far off in the manor struck the half-hour with the same slow, deliberate authority it had struck the hour an hour ago. The 2 candles on the rail bent again toward one another in the same slow draught from the east, and steadied again. A draught does not open a door so deliberately. In this house, Your Grace, a draught does many things. She turned her face away from him, toward the dark of the east corridor. The brass key on its black ribbon caught the candle behind her and threw, for a moment, a small, bright thread of light on the paneling. She did not turn back. "Go back to bed. There is nothing for you down there tonight." "And tomorrow night?" "Tomorrow night," she said, "you will be halfway to London. Or not, as you choose." He did not go back to bed. He sat down on the step above hers, set his candle on the rail, and folded his arms across his knees. After a long moment, she sat too, 1 step below him, and set her own candle beside his. The 2 flames bent toward one another in the slow draught from the east wing and steadied. "Tell me about the estate," he said. "Tonight, not the marriage clause. The estate. What did my uncle leave me?" She glanced at him sidelong. The hazel of her eyes had gone the color of dark honey in the candlelight. "He left you," she said. "A debt." The east wing draught moved the candles again. They bent and steadied. Somewhere in the lower hall a beam ticked as the cold worked into the wood. Adam said nothing for a long moment. He looked along the gallery at the row of portraits in their dim, varnished frames, the ravens' hollows of 3 generations, each face turned politely toward the wall opposite, none of them looking at him, all of them, in their patient, inherited way, his to answer for now. He felt the weight of the manor settle on his shoulders, the way a heavy coat settles on a soldier who has taken it off and has, against his expectation, been asked to put it back on. In the morning, he did not ride to London. He sat at the great oak desk in the library, with Cordelia Vale across from him, and she set out the ledgers in the order in which she had kept them, the rent rolls, the tenant accounts, the timber sales, the kitchen books, the wages, the household linens, the grain. She turned the pages without looking down. She knew them. She knew what his uncle had owed the corn merchant in Wiltshire, and what the gamekeeper's widow was due in pension, and what the slate roof on the south barn would cost to mend before winter. She knew which tenant had asked for an extension of his lease, and which had asked for a reduction of his rent, and which had asked for nothing, because he was too proud, and what the right answer to each had been. Adam listened. He had commanded men in Spain. He knew the sound of a person who had been carrying a weight a long time, alone, and had become so used to the weight that they no longer mentioned it. When she finished, she closed the last book and folded her hands on the cover. Your uncle was, by the time of his last illness, very nearly bankrupt, Your Grace. I have kept the estate solvent these 2 years by selling the timber at the upper wood, and by economies your uncle would not have liked to see written down. I have not paid myself a wage in 18 months. I tell you this not to be thanked. I tell you this because you should know what you have inherited before you decide whether to keep it. He looked at her for a long moment. Her chin was lifted again. She was prepared, he realized, to be dismissed. She was prepared to walk out of the library in her dark bronze silk, with the brass key still at her throat, and find another house. "Why?" he said. "Have you not paid yourself a wage?" "Because there was no money to pay it with." He turned the topmost ledger toward himself. The columns on the open page ran in 2 parallel rows down the right margin, the ink fresh in some entries and faded in others, all of it in a single, careful hand. He read the column for the first quarter. He read the column for the second. There was timber. The timber was for the slate roof. He set his elbows on the desk. He set his chin on his linked fingers. He looked at her over them, and for the first time since he had crossed the threshold, he allowed himself to look at her plainly, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who had been doing his work for him for 2 years without his knowing her name. "Miss Vale." "Your Grace." The morning light through the library window had moved a finger's breadth along the desk while she had spoken. He noted the migration of the light without remarking on it, a soldier's habit of marking time by what shifted slowly in a still room. And he set both his palms flat on the blotter, as a man might lay his palms flat on a map he had decided, after long study, to commit to. "I am not, at this moment, riding to London." "No, Your Grace. But I have not yet agreed to be married, either." "No, Your Grace." A small wind moved the curtain at the window. The candle on the desk leaned and steadied. The brass key at her throat caught the new angle of the light and threw a small bright circle on the paneling behind her, the size of a coin, and then lost it as her breath shifted. "Could you tell me, and I should like the truth, whether the late Duke's clause was your idea or his?" A faint flush moved up her throat, the first he had seen on her. The brass key rose and fell with her breath. "His," she said. "I argued against it. He was not a man who took argument well. I lost." "What did you argue?" "That a duke should not be made to marry a housekeeper's daughter against his will, even by a clever clause." Her hazel eyes lifted to his and stayed. "I argued, Your Grace, that I would refuse the seal if he tried to put it in my hand. He laughed at me. He said I was the only person in 3 counties he trusted to hold it. And then he was taken from us, 6 months later, on a Tuesday, and the seal came to me anyway." Adam closed his eyes for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for the truth." The fire in the library grate had burned to a quiet, steady red. Outside the window, the autumn sun had begun to lay a low, yellow band along the home meadow, and the mist that had clung overnight to the gates was burning off in a slow, ragged retreat toward the river. "I have nothing else to give you, Your Grace." He opened his eyes. "You have, in fact, given me a great deal." He gestured at the ledgers. "I had not understood, until this morning, what kind of house I had inherited. I am beginning to." She inclined her head. "Cordelia." He used her name for the first time, deliberately, to see what it would do. It did very little to her face. It did rather more to him. "I will stay a week. I will see the estate. I will meet the tenants. At the end of the week, we will speak again about the clause. Until then—" "Until then, Your Grace?" "Until then, you continue as you have been. You hold the seal. You keep the books. And you tell me, before nightfall, what was behind that east wing door at 3 in the morning." She did not answer at once. Her hand went to the brass key at her throat and closed around it as a woman might close her hand around a child's wrist to keep it from running into a road. "Not yet," she said. "Not before nightfall. Not before the week is out." Ask me again at the end of 7 days, Your Grace, and I will answer you. I will not lie to you, but I will not be hurried. He held her gaze. 7 days, he said. Agreed. She rose. She gathered the ledgers into her arms, capable hands, ink-stained at the second knuckles, and carried them to the cabinet beneath the window. The brass key turned in the lock. The cabinet opened. The cabinet closed. The brass key returned to the black ribbon at her throat. She turned at the door. There will be a letter today, Your Grace, from a London solicitor named Cresswell. He acts for your cousin, Lord Mortimer Thrace. I thought you should be warned before it arrives. Thrace is contesting. Thrace is contesting. He has been contesting in writing since the day your uncle's passing was announced in the Gazette. He believed he was the heir. Was he ever? Never, she said. Not once, in any version of any will your uncle drafted. Lord Mortimer is beautiful, Your Grace, and clever, and rotten through the centre of him like an apple gone soft in the bin. The late Duke knew it. So do I. So, soon, will you. She went out, and the library door closed behind her with the same small, definite sound the front door had made the night before. The letter arrived at 4. A boy on a tired pony, the seal a barrister's gilt, the handwriting copperplate. Adam read it at the desk, while the autumn light failed in the windows, and Cordelia stood at the hearth with her hands behind her back, watching the fire, not him. He calls the clause, Adam said, a coercion of the late Duke's faculties. He would. He turned the page. The barrister's copperplate ran down the second sheet in long, even lines, the work of a clerk who had been paid to make every threat look reasonable. He requests an inspection of the will at Chancery within the month. He may have it. A coal in the grate split with a small, dry crack. Cordelia did not turn from the fire. Adam watched her shoulders. They did not move. He had served under a colonel once who could read 3 pages of a French dispatch with that same straight-backed stillness. And he had learned, from that colonel, that stillness was not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. He intends to be present at the inspection, in person, with 2 witnesses of his own. He will be. Adam folded the letter slowly along its original creases. You have read this letter before, Miss Vale, or one very like it. I have read 3 like it in the last 6 months, Your Grace. Your uncle was buried in May. I have been answering Cresswell alone since June, with what counsel a Mr. Pettigrew of Lincoln's Inn, your uncle's old solicitor and friend, could spare by post. He will be ours when we go up for the inspection. She turned from the fire. I should be glad of the help, if you mean to give it. I mean to give it. He set the letter down. Sit. We will draft the reply tonight. She sat. The candle on the desk between them guttered once and steadied. Outside, somewhere far across the autumn fields, a church bell tolled the hour. And in the long gallery upstairs, the long case clock answered it with its slow, deliberate authority. Adam dipped a pen. He looked across the desk at the woman his uncle had bound him to, and he found, with a small, sober shock, that he was not sorry to be sitting where he was. He drafted. She corrected. He drafted again. By midnight, the reply was sealed. By the 3rd night, he had begun to understand the rhythm of her days, and the rhythm, he was beginning to suspect, was the manor itself, transcribed into a single woman's day. She was up before the kitchen fire was lit, because she lit it. She walked the kitchen garden at first light with a basket on her arm. She wrote the day's letters at the oak desk between 7 and 9. She rode out to one tenant or another between 10 and noon, never the same tenant twice in the same week, so that no one was favoured and no one was forgotten. She ate a small dinner alone in the morning room at 1. She kept the books between 2 and 4. She received between 4 and 6 anyone from the village who had business at the manor. The rector, the apothecary's apprentice, the smith's wife with a question about her son's apprenticeship. She dressed for the evening at 6. She dined at 7, formally, even when she dined alone, because, she said quietly when he asked, a house that kept its forms, kept itself. She read in the library between 8 and 10. She went up the stairs at 10 with a single candle, and somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, on most nights, the east wing door opened. He did not ask again. Not yet. He had given his word for 7 days. On the 4th day, she came into the library in a ruby gown. He had not expected the gown. He had expected the dark bronze silk, or the grey morning dress, or the indigo riding habit she had worn the day before to the South Fields. The ruby was a different woman, or the same woman, allowed at last. The colour caught the candlelight and threw it at her throat, where the brass key still hung on its black ribbon, and at her wrists, where lace fell over her ink-stained knuckles, and at her mouth, which she had not painted, but which looked, in that gown, as though it had been. "The harvest dinner," she said, before he could speak. "I should have warned you. The tenants come tonight. We dine in the great hall. I should have told you yesterday. I forgot." You did not forget. A small, surprised smile crossed her face and was gone. "Perhaps I did not," she said. "Perhaps I wished to see whether you would stand it." "I will stand it. Will I be required to make a speech?" "You will be required only to sit at the head of the table and be served first. Speeches will be made to you, not by you. The rector will rise. Old Mr. Halloran, the cooper, will rise, if he is sober, and possibly if he is not. The smith will rise. You will nod. You will thank them. You will ask after their wives. You will not, on any account, mention the clause." "On no account." "On no account, Your Grace. The tenants do not yet know there is a clause. They know only that you are come. They will assume, most of them, that I am to be turned out by Christmas. They will be polite to me tonight, as one is polite to a friend at her last evening before a long sea voyage." He stared at her. "You will not be turned out by Christmas, Miss Vale." "You have not yet decided that, Your Grace." He looked at her across the desk. The candle between them threw the small, bright reflection of itself in the polished oak. The brass key on its black ribbon hung at her throat in the steady light. He turned the question over once in the back of his mind, as a man turns over a coin in his pocket without taking it out, and found that he had, in fact, already decided. "I have decided that." She held his eyes a long moment. The brass key rose and fell. "Then I shall enjoy my dinner," she said. "Excuse me. I must see to the venison." The great hall was warm, with the breath of 40 people, and the heat of a fire built up against the autumn chill. Beeswax candles burned in 2 long silver branches down the table. Firelight from the hearth threw the carved roof beams into shadow and gold. The smell of roast venison and wet wool and wood smoke and apple brandy filled the room. Children sat on a separate bench at the far end, with bowls of sweetened cream, and laughed the careful, half-watched laughter of children who knew this was a grown-up's evening. Cordelia had spent the day on her feet. He had seen her cross the kitchen yard at noon with a tray of pewter plates so heavy it bent her wrist, and he had taken 3 of them from her without asking, and she had let him, and that was a small, new thing between them. He had seen her on the back stair at 3, pinning the sleeves of 2 of the Halloran granddaughters, who had been promised to help at the table, and had arrived with their cuffs unhemmed. He had seen her at 5, at the head of the long table, folding the napkins with the small, exact creases her mother had taught her. He had not, at any point, seen her sit. She had not eaten since breakfast. He noticed these things now. He had not noticed them, he understood, a week ago. A week ago, he had been a man who had been told he was to be married against his will. He was now, he found, a man who counted whether his housekeeper had eaten her dinner, and whether her wrist was bent under a weight she would not put down. The doors at the foot of the hall opened. The tenants came in 2 and 3 at a time, ducking the lintel, hats off, boots scraped clean on the straw mat outside. Mrs. Wren, the smith's wife, came in with her son on her arm, a boy of 9, with a high colour and a careful step, and she looked first, not at the Duke at the head of the table, but at Cordelia at the foot, and Cordelia inclined her head to her, and Mrs. Wren inclined her head back, and an entire conversation passed between them that Adam was not, this evening, party to. Old Mr. Halloran the cooper came in with his wife on one arm and the smith on the other, because the cooper had begun his apple brandy, on his own account, at 4 in the afternoon, and required 2 arms to keep him on the gravel. He sat down with the gravity of a man who has decided to perform sobriety as a public service. The rector came in, with damp shoulders, and the small, surprised smile of a man who had not expected to be glad of an evening, and now expected to be very glad indeed. The bailiff came in with 2 of his sons. The shepherd came in with his dog at his heel. The dog, by ancient custom, was permitted on harvest night, and lay down at once under the table at the cooper's feet, which were warm. The apothecary came in last, alone, with a small bunch of late chrysanthemums in his fist for Cordelia, which he laid on her plate without speech, and went to his seat. Adam sat at the head of the table. Cordelia sat at the foot. Between them, 34 tenants. The rector rose first. He spoke briefly and well. He thanked the new duke for honouring the harvest table, and he thanked Miss Vale for keeping the table set through the long summer. And he sat down with the wet eyes of a man who had lost a friend in May, and was determined not to disgrace himself in October. Old Mr. Halloran, the cooper, rose next. He was not sober. He spoke for 7 minutes about a barrel he had made in 1809. The barrel had, in his telling, been the finest barrel ever cut on Ravenshollow ground, and had been bought by a Bristol merchant for an unlikely sum, and had, he had heard but could not swear to it, gone on to sea in the hold of a frigate. He paused after the frigate. He had lost the thread. He looked along the candles to Cordelia, whose face was composed into the expression of polite interest she had, on her father's knee, learned to wear through sermons, and he found his thread again. The barrel, he said, had been made of timber from the upper wood. The very wood, ladies and gentlemen, the very wood that this lady, at the foot of the table, had had cut in the spring to mend the slate roof on the south barn, and a finer use no honest tree had ever been put to, and he would say so to the king, if the king ever had the wit to ask him. The smith's wife, who was seated beside him, took his elbow at the 8th minute and helped him into his chair with a tenderness that suggested she had done it before. The hall laughed, gently, the way a family laughs at a known story. Adam laughed too. He did not, until that moment, understand that he had been admitted. Then the smith rose. He was a short, square man, with hands the size of small spades. He looked down the long table, past the candles, past the venison, to the woman at the foot in her ruby gown. "Miss Cordelia," he said, "begging your grace's pardon. I'll say it to her, for I've said it to no one else." Adam inclined his head. "Say it, Mr. Wren." "My boy were down with a fever last March, when the late Duke were taken bad, and the whole house were turned over. There weren't a doctor to be had in 3 parishes, for they were all at the Manor. Miss Cordelia rode over at midnight with a pot of something her mother had taught her to make, and she sat with my boy till morning, and she rode home at 5. My boy's in this hall tonight, sat by his mother, and he is alive, and I will not forget it." He turned his big square face to Adam. "You've a good woman in this house, your grace. I hope you know what you've got." He sat down. The hall did not laugh this time. The hall was very still. Adam looked down the long table at Cordelia Vale in her ruby gown. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her chin was lifted. The brass key was hidden inside the high lace of her collar tonight, but he knew exactly where it lay against her throat, and he knew exactly the rise and fall of it now. "Mr. Wren," he said. The hall heard him without his needing to raise his voice. "I am beginning to." The smith inclined his head. The smith's wife folded her hand over her son's. The boy, who had been told that an introduction would be required of him, and had been practicing his bow since Tuesday, half rose, half bowed, and sat down again with the abrupt grace of a child who had remembered, just in time, that he was supposed to be small. The rest of the dinner ran as such dinners run. The venison was carried in and carved. The apple brandy went round. Mrs. Wren passed Adam a small dish of pickled pears she had brought herself, in case, she said with the particular matter-of-fact courtesy of a woman who fed her family from a single hearth. The Manor's pears had not, this autumn, taken kindly to the cellar. Adam, who had not eaten a pickled pear in 11 years, took two and praised them. The smith's wife relaxed visibly into her chair, as though a small private exam had been passed. The bailiff's eldest son, who was 16 and had never in his life sat at a duke's table, knocked over a cup of small beer in the second hour and turned the colour of a winter sunrise. Cordelia, without rising from her own chair, made a small gesture to the maid at the sideboard. A fresh cloth was laid over the spill in a single, quiet movement. The boy was permitted to pretend nothing had happened, and he ate his venison afterwards with the cautious dignity of a small ambassador. A girl of 12, in a fresh apron, played 3 carols on a small fiddle from the corner, the third one badly, and was applauded harder for the third than for the first 2 because she had attempted it. Adam asked her name. She told him. He asked her, gravely, whether she would do him the honour of playing the same 3 at the next harvest, in better weather. The girl, who had been told all her life that she was a serious child, and had not, until that moment, been spoken to as a serious adult, blushed to the line of her hair, and promised that she would. Her mother, 2 seats over, set down her cup very carefully, as a woman does when she does not wish to be seen taking a moment. The shepherd's dog under the table moved, by some private migration, from the cooper's feet to Adam's, and laid its grey muzzle on his boot, and went to sleep. Adam did not move his foot for the better part of an hour. Cordelia, at the foot of the table, saw this. She did not remark on it. She only set down her glass once, very slowly, and looked at him the length of the candles, and looked away. He carried, after that, a particular small warmth in his chest, which he did not name, and which he was content to carry unnamed for the rest of the evening. After the tenants had gone, boots on gravel, lanterns swinging into the mist, the smith's wife guiding old Mr. Halloran down the drive with a patience that would not be hurried, Cordelia stood at the front door and watched the last lantern out of sight. Adam stood behind her in the hall. He did not speak. He did not need to. At length she closed the door, turned, and leaned her back against it, as a woman leans who has been on her feet a long time, and does not yet wish to admit it. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not making a speech." He laughed, once, surprised. "I was instructed not to." "You were instructed. That is not the same as obeying. Most men would have made the speech anyway. My father would have." "Your father?" He had not heard her speak of her father, gone these 12 years. A clergyman, a good man, a great speechmaker. You could not be in a room of more than 3 people without rising to address them. She smiled, a small, private smile, not for him. "My mother used to say he had been born standing up." "And your mother?" The smile went. "My mother left us last winter," she said, "alone. I was in London for 3 days fetching the apothecary a particular tincture for the late Duke's cough. I had left her well. I came home to find her gone. Mrs. Ben Halligan had sat with her at the end. She had asked for me. I was not there." Her hand went to the brass key at her throat. "I do not, Your Grace, intend to be 3 days from this house again, unless I must." He took one step toward her. He did not touch her. He stopped a careful arm's length away, because she had not invited closeness, and because he had not yet earned the right to give it. "I am sorry," he said. "Thank you," she said. The candle in the hall guttered. A draught from somewhere, perhaps the east wing, perhaps not, moved the flame and steadied it. She straightened from the door. "I shall go up," she said. "Good night, Your Grace." "Good night, Cordelia." She paused at the foot of the stairs. She did not turn. "Good night, Adam." She went up. The brass key caught the candlelight once on the landing, and was gone. In the morning they rode the south fields together. She wore the indigo riding habit. He wore an indigo coat that had been cut for him in Lisbon, and had survived 3 campaigns and looked, against the autumn sky, very nearly the same colour as her habit. She did not remark on it. He did not remark on it. They rode out through the kitchen gate and across the home meadow and up the chalk track to the long ridge where the south fields fell away in stubble and mist toward the river, and she named, as they rode, every field and every tenant and every drainage ditch that needed reopening before the winter rains. He listened. Now and then he asked a question. Her answers were short, exact, and never embroidered. He had served under colonels who could not give a clearer brief. At the top of the ridge, they stopped to breathe the horses. The mist had thinned into a low, silvery scarf over the river. A heron rose from the reeds and flew, slow and grey, against the slow, grey sky. Cordelia turned her face to the wind. The hood of her habit had fallen back. Her auburn hair caught the cold light. "There," she said, pointing. "The line of the willows. That is where your uncle's land ends. Beyond the willows is Thrace's." A small wind off the river lifted the loose strand at her temple. She did not put it back. The mare under her shifted her weight in the cold and was still. "Thrace owns the next estate. He owns 3,000 acres bordering yours. He has wished for 10 years to own 3,500. The home farm. The West Wood. The mill. Yes." Adam looked along her pointing finger to the line of willows. He was a soldier. He understood ground. He understood why a man with 3,000 acres would want the 500 that gave him the river, the wood, and the mill. "He will not have them," he said. She lowered her hand. She looked at him. "No," she said. "He will not." They rode home slowly. The horses dropped to a walk of their own accord at the head of the chalk. The mist had lifted entirely from the river and lay now only in the small folds of the lower fields, like a hand laid across a sleeping shoulder. A flight of rooks crossed the sky above them, calling, and turned together in a single long curve toward the upper wood. Halfway down the chalk track, she said, without looking at him, "You did not ask last night about the East Wing. The 7 days are not yet out. I am grateful." "The 7 days are not yet out," he agreed. "But, Cordelia, when they are out, I will ask. I will not be put off again." "I know," she said. "I am preparing myself." "To tell me?" "To trust you with the telling." 2 days later he found the East Wing door at midday and tried the handle. He had not meant to. He had been crossing the gallery to fetch a book, and his eye had fallen on the door, and his hand had moved to the handle before his sense had caught up with his hand. The handle did not turn. The door was locked. The lock was new, a good London lock set into old oak, and it had been set there, he could see by the bright brass, within the year. A step behind him. He turned. Cordelia stood at the head of the gallery with a small jug of water in her hand. He had time to see the jug, and the napkin folded over its mouth, and the small loaf of bread on the tray she carried under it. He had time to understand, before she spoke, that she had been carrying food. "Your Grace." "Cordelia?" "I asked you to wait." "I was not trying. My hand—" He stopped. He would not lie to her. "My hand was. Forgive it." She set the tray down on a side table. She came along the gallery to him. She did not look angry. She looked, for the first time since he had known her, frightened. Not of him, of something behind the door. 3 more days, Your Grace. I asked for 7. You owe me 3. The hand that had held the tray was not quite steady now. She had set the tray down a moment too late to hide it. He saw the small tremor of the napkin over the jug, and he did not, in courtesy, look at it directly. "You owe me," he said quietly, "the truth." "I will pay it, on the 7th day, not before. I beg you." She had never used the word beg. It struck him harder than he expected. He let his hand fall from the door. 3 days, he said. 3 days. She picked up the tray. She turned. She walked, quite steadily, back along the gallery and down the servants' stair, and she did not look behind her to see whether he watched her go. He watched her go. That afternoon a carriage came up the drive without warning. Adam was in the south field with the bailiff when the boy came running. A black and gilt carriage, 4 horses, 2 men inside besides the gentleman. The gentleman had given his name at the gate. The gentleman was Lord Mortimer Thrace. Adam was at the Manor in 11 minutes. He came in through the kitchen door, mud on his boots, his indigo coat dark across the shoulders with the autumn rain that had begun on the ride home, and he found Cordelia in the great hall, facing his cousin alone. Lord Mortimer Thrace was, as she had said, beautiful. He was Adam's height, and very nearly Adam's build, but where Adam was soldier-built, Thrace was tailored. Narrow at the waist, where Adam was broad, fine-boned at the wrist, where Adam was heavy, fair-haired, where Adam was dark. His eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky over a frozen lake. He smiled when he saw Adam come in. The smile did not touch his eyes. "Cousin," Thrace inclined his head. The pearl pin in his cravat caught the dull grey light from the high windows of the great hall and threw it back the colour of a winter pond. "I had hoped to find you at home. I was beginning to fear I would have to take my tea with Miss Vale unsupervised." "Lord Mortimer." Adam did not bow. He did not move from the doorway. The mud on his boots had begun to dry in the warmth of the hearth at his back. He could feel the weight of the indigo coat across his shoulders, heavy with rain, and he did not, at that moment, regret any of it. "You are uninvited." "I am family." "You are uninvited." Thrace's smile widened a degree. Behind him, 2 men in plain dark coats stood with their hats in their hands and their eyes on the floor. Solicitors' clerks, Adam judged, brought as witnesses to whatever Thrace had hoped to provoke. "Cousin, I have come a long way in foul weather. I have come to satisfy myself, on behalf of the family, that the late Duke's affairs are in proper hands. I have heard, I will not say from whom, that a certain housekeeper's daughter has been keeping the books." "You will not," Adam said evenly, "refer to Miss Vale as a housekeeper's daughter in my hall again." Thrace's pale eyes narrowed. "Forgive me. I had not understood how the wind blew." "You understand now." "I do." Thrace turned a degree, so that he could include Cordelia in the small, polished smile. "Miss Vale, you are very fortunate in your champion. I trust you have not exerted yourself." Cordelia did not move. Her chin was lifted. The brass key was hidden under her collar. Her ink-stained hands were folded at her waist. "I have exerted myself, Lord Mortimer," she said, "on behalf of the estate, as I have done for 2 years. You are at liberty to inspect the books at any hour of the working day. The bailiff will conduct you. You will not, however, inspect them in the evening, because the working day ends at 6, and the late Duke kept regular hours." "The late Duke," Thrace said softly, "is no longer with us." The phrase fell into the hall like a stone into a still pond. Adam saw Cordelia's mouth tighten, just once. "The late Duke," she said, "kept regular hours. I keep them in his memory. You may inspect the books between 9 and 6. Good afternoon, Lord Mortimer." Thrace looked at her. Then he looked at Adam. Then he laughed. A short, polite, contained laugh. The laugh of a man who has measured his ground and found it less generous than he had hoped. "Cousin," he said, "we will speak again at Chancery. I look forward to it." "As do I," said Adam. Thrace bowed. He gathered his clerks with a small flick of his fingers. He went out into the rain. The black and gilt carriage turned in the drive and was gone. Adam stood in the open door until the wheels were past the gate. Then he closed the door, slowly, and turned. Cordelia had not moved. She stood in the center of the great hall with her hands folded at her waist and her chin lifted. And she was, he saw now, shaking. Not in the broad, visible way of a person about to sit down. In the small, private way of a person who had spent 20 minutes holding herself absolutely still against an opponent who had wished her to flinch, and had now, with the closing of the door, been permitted to feel her own heart. He crossed the hall to her in 4 strides. He stopped at a careful arm's length. He did not touch her. "He is gone," he said. "Yes." The rain on the great hall windows ran down the leaded panes in long, bright lines. He could see, beyond her shoulder, the patch of gravel where the black and gilt carriage had stood, and the 2 grooves the wheels had left in the wet, slowly filling with water. He will not come back uninvited. He will. He has waited 10 years for this estate. He will not be seen off by an afternoon's coffee. He will write tomorrow morning. Let him write. He will write to the rector. He will write to 2 of the tenants. He will write, and this you should be ready for, to the bishop, suggesting that the late Duke's faculties were, at the end, suspect. The bishop will not act on it. He will, however, ask. We must be ready to answer. He took half a step toward her, without intending to, and stopped, because she had not yet given him the small sign that closeness would be welcome. He set his hand on the back of the long oak settle instead, and leaned his weight on it, and felt the wood take the weight without protest. We will be. We, he said. And stop saying it as though you have not earned the word. You have, Cordelia. You earned it the night you sat with me on the gallery stair, and told me what I had inherited. Then I will say it more easily. Then I will be here when he does. She drew in a long breath. The shaking in her hand stilled. She lifted her face to him. Her hazel eyes were bright and dry. Thank you, Adam. Cordelia. He did not say more. He did not need to. After a moment she nodded, once, and went out of the hall toward the kitchen, and he stood in the empty great hall with the rain on the windows, and understood, with a clarity that did not surprise him, that he had chosen. The next morning a letter came from Pettigrew. The chancery date was set for the 14th of November. They had a fortnight. They would need to be in London a week before. They would need clean clothes. He would need a barrister. They would need, Cordelia said quietly over the breakfast table, to take the seal and the ledger she had been keeping in private, the ledger she had not yet shown him. Not, she said, because she did not trust him, because she did not yet trust the chancery. The ledger was his lever. It would not be set down until London. He did not press her. He had 3 days yet on the East Wing. He would not start a second negotiation while the first was still running. That afternoon she came into the library in the emerald library dress and asked him to stand still while she adjusted his cravat for the journey to London, because the village tailor had set the collar half an inch too high, and she would not have him arriving at Pettigrew's chambers looking as though he had borrowed his coat from a younger brother. He stood still. Her hands came up to his collar. They were close enough that he could see the small ink stain on the second knuckle of her right hand, fresher today, a blot from the morning's letters. Close enough that he could smell the lavender she kept in the linen press. Close enough that the brass key on its black ribbon swung once between them, and brushed, very lightly, the back of her own knuckles as she folded the linen down. Her fingers worked at the collar. They were quick and capable. They were also, he noticed, unhurried. Unhurried in the particular way of hands that have decided to take longer than they need. He did not move. He did not breathe, except as required. There, she said. Her hand brushed his throat as she folded the last edge. He felt the pad of her thumb at the angle of his jaw, just under the ear, for the time it took a man to count 1. He did not, in that count, breathe. She did not, in that count, look at his eyes. She looked, very precisely, at the linen between her own fingers, as a woman looks at her work when she does not, on any account, intend to look at the man wearing it. That is better. The barrister will not laugh at you now. I would not have noticed if he had. I would have. Her hands came down. She stepped back. The emerald of her dress moved against the firelight in a single, slow shift of green that he noted and chose not to remark on. and would not afterwards forget. "Your Grace." "Cordelia?" The fire in the library hearth had burned down to a steady red. Outside the window, the autumn afternoon had begun to lower into the early dark of November, and the candle on the desk had been lit by Mrs. Penhaligon at some point in the last hour, without either of them noticing. "We leave Tuesday." "Tuesday." She turned and went out, and Adam stood for a full minute in the center of the library, with the ghost of her thumb under his ear, and the ghost of the brass key against his collarbone, where it had not, in fact, touched him. And he understood that the 7 days were almost out, and that the east wing door would open for him before they left for London. He understood, too, that he had stopped, somewhere between the harvest dinner and the ride along the upper ridge, measuring the days. He had begun, instead, measuring the weeks, and beyond the weeks, the seasons, and beyond the seasons, the long, unhurried calendar of a house that meant to outlast a man and his wife and their children's children, and that would, if it were properly kept, do so. The thought did not alarm him. It steadied him, in the way the long ridge above the South Fields had steadied him on the morning he had first ridden it with her, the ground falling away in a slow grey curve toward the river, and a heron rising, and a woman beside him in an indigo riding habit, naming what was his. It opened the next dawn. He had risen at 4, unable to sleep, and had walked the gallery in his shirt sleeves with a candle. He had not, this time, gone toward her room. He had gone past it, deliberately, toward the east wing. He had stopped at the locked door. He had not tried the handle. He had simply waited. At 4:15, he heard her soft step on the back stair. She came up with the tray, fresh bread, a covered dish, a small pot of honey. She came along the gallery without seeing him, because he had set his candle down on the floor behind a chair and stood in the panelling shadow as a soldier stands. She set the tray down. She drew a key from the bunch at her waist. She fitted it to the lock. The door opened. She stepped through. She did not see him. She closed the door behind her, but she did not, this time, turn the key. Perhaps because her hands were full, perhaps because the 7th day had begun, and some part of her had decided. He waited the count of 50. Then he came forward, soundless. He laid his hand on the door. He pushed it open. The east wing was not what he had expected. He had expected dust sheets, stale air, a closed-up nursery, perhaps a sick room. He found instead a narrow passage cleanly swept, a small flight of steps down, and at the bottom of the steps a door that opened onto a covered walkway he had never known existed, a roofed gallery running along the kitchen garden wall toward the gatehouse at the foot of the orchard. The walkway had been built, by the look of the joinery, long before his uncle's time. The boards underfoot were waxed. A line of small unlit lanterns hung from hooks set into the inner wall at intervals of 5 paces. For a person who walked the route, he understood, in dark weather, without wishing to carry a candle, that could be seen from the manor windows. He counted the lanterns as he passed them. 7. 7 small private lights, hung for a use the rest of the world had not been told about. He followed the walkway. He did not announce himself. At the gatehouse door he stopped. Inside, 2 voices. "You are late this morning, Cordelia." "The Duke is up and about. I had to wait." "He has not found out." "He nearly did. 3 days ago. He tried the gallery door. I made him promise to wait until the 7th day. The 7th day is today." "Then he will know by tonight." "He will know in the next quarter of an hour. He is behind me on the walkway. I heard his foot on the 2nd step." A long silence. Then the second voice, younger than Adam had expected. A man's voice, but a young man's, perhaps 19, with the faint betraying tremor of someone trying very hard to keep his fear out of his throat. "What will he do, Cordelia?" "I do not know yet, Tobias. But I think he will not turn you out. You have said that before. This time I think I am right." Adam pushed the door open. The gatehouse was a single, low-beamed room with a clean fire and a small bed in the alcove, and a table laid with the bread and honey Cordelia had carried from the kitchen. A shelf above the bed held a row of well-thumbed books, a Latin grammar, a Greek primer, a thin volume of Cowper, a thick one of Gibbon, a folio of pencil drawings tied with a leather thong. The wall opposite the fire was hung with 3 studies in chalk: a kestrel in flight, a stoat in winter coat, the line of the upper wood from the gatehouse window, drawn with a hand that had been allowed to teach itself over years, and had taught itself well. A young man stood at the far side of the table. He was tall and slight, with auburn hair a shade darker than Cordelia's, and hazel eyes the same color, and a face that was not yet quite a man's face. He was healthy. He was clean. He was terrified. "Your Grace." Cordelia turned without surprise. She had heard him on the walkway. She had told the young man as much. "May I present my brother, Tobias? He is 19 years old. He has lived in this gatehouse since he was 12. Adam looked at her. He looked at the young man. He looked at her again. "Your brother?" "My half-brother. My father's son, not my mother's. Born to a woman in the village who would not name him. My father took him at 3 days old. My father was lost to us when Tobias was 7, and my mother, who had every right to turn him out, did not. She raised him in this house until he was 12. Then your uncle took an interest, and we judged it safer to move him to the gatehouse, and to let the village believe he had been sent to a cousin in Bristol. He has been here, with my mother and me, for 7 years. He does not leave the orchard. He reads. He draws. He is being prepared for a life he cannot yet have." "Why?" Adam said carefully. "Could he not have it?" "Because if it were known, Your Grace, that the late rector of Ravenshollow Parish had got a child on a village girl, and that his lawful daughter had concealed the boy in a duke's gatehouse for 7 years, the scandal would touch this house and ruin it. The estate's tenants would not stand it. The chancery would not stand it. Your uncle, who knew, would not allow it spoken of in his lifetime. This is the curse of Ravenshollow Manor, Your Grace. A boy who has done nothing wrong, hidden in an orchard for 7 years to keep a parish from talking." Adam stood very still. He looked at Tobias. The boy, the young man, met his eyes, then lowered them, then lifted them again with the small, brave movement of a person who had been told to be ashamed of himself for so long that meeting another man's eyes had become an act of will. "Tobias." "Your Grace?" The young man's hand at the table was not steady. The fire in the small hearth threw a moving square of warm light across the wall behind him, across the chalk drawing of the kestrel, across the line of well-thumbed books, and the warm light caught the auburn of his hair and made him, for a moment, look very like his sister. "How do you take your bread?" The young man blinked. "Sir?" "Honey or butter?" "Honey, sir. Cordelia brings honey." "Then sit," said Adam, "and let us eat your honey, and let us discuss how a young man of 19 who reads and draws is to be made a useful subject of the crown, without ruining a parish." He sat down at the table. After a long moment, Tobias sat too, slowly, as a deer comes to a hand. Cordelia stood at the end of the table, with her hands folded over the brass key, and her hazel eyes very bright. Adam did not look at her. He looked at the bread. He broke a piece. He passed it to Tobias. "There is," he said, "a small property near Bristol. My uncle's, now mine. A house, a paddock, a kitchen garden, and 100 acres of indifferent grazing. The tenant farmer who has it now is 60 and wishes to retire to his daughters. The house has a name. It is called Holloway. If a young man of 19, a Mr. Tobias Holloway, were to take up residence there in the spring, and were to write to me, his cousin, from time to time about the grazing, I do not see that any parish would have a thing to say." Tobias's hand stopped halfway to the bread. Cordelia did not move. Adam heard her breath catch and steady. "Mr. Tobias Holloway," she said. "It is a good name," said Adam. "It is no one's name," It will be his. The young man set the bread down. He looked at his sister. He looked at Adam. His mouth opened. It closed. He looked at his sister again. Then, with the slow, deliberate movement of a person performing a thing he had not, until that moment, believed himself permitted to do, he reached across the table and shook the new Duke's hand. "Thank you, sir." "You are welcome, Mr. Holloway." Cordelia turned her face to the small fire in the gatehouse hearth. She did not, Adam saw, intend to be seen weeping. He looked away from her, courteously, and ate his bread, and did not speak again until she was ready. Tobias, after a long while, found his voice. It was a steady voice, considering. "I have been told, sir, all my life, that I am not to be spoken of." "You are spoken of now," said Adam, "in this room, by your sister and your sister's husband-to-be, and we will between us decide what is and is not to be told outside it. You have done nothing wrong, Mr. Holloway. The world is sometimes ungenerous to people who have done nothing wrong. We will be careful for you. That is all." Tobias looked down at the bread in his hand. He looked up again. "Sir, may I ride? There is a cob in the stable I have watched from this window for 3 years. I have never sat on him. Cordelia would not let me, in case I was seen on the upper field." Adam considered. "After the Chancery hearing in November, you may sit on him at first light, in the home meadow, with a groom who can hold his tongue. After Christmas, when you have moved to Holloway, you may sit on any horse in any field at any hour of the day or night you please. Will that do for now?" "Yes, sir." The young man's mouth moved as though he had a great deal more to say, and had not yet rehearsed any of it. He settled, in the end, for, "Thank you, sir." "Eat your bread, Mr. Holloway." He ate his bread. Cordelia turned back from the fire. Her eyes were dry. The brass key at her throat caught a small spark of the firelight. She came to the table and sat at the third place. Tobias had laid a third place, Adam noticed, before he had come in. She had told the boy, then, that the Duke would be at the door. And she broke a piece of bread of her own, and the three of them ate together in the gatehouse, with the autumn light coming up grey over the orchard. And Adam understood, with the same clean satisfaction he had felt at the harvest dinner under the shepherd's dog, that he was not a guest in this room, and not, any longer, a stranger to it. "Cordelia." "Adam." He turned his bread in his fingers, slowly, and set it down again. The fire in the gatehouse hearth had begun to give back the smell of the hot honey from the small earthenware pot on the table. A clean autumn smell, the smell of a kitchen that had been used by a careful woman for a very long time. "How long has the walkway been there?" "My grandfather built it. It was meant for a great uncle of yours, who returned from the East Indies very ill and could not bear company. He used it for 2 years, and then he was better and rode out, and the walkway was forgotten. My mother remembered it. We swept it when Tobias was 12. "Your mother knew?" "My mother arranged it." He absorbed this in silence. He turned the small pot of honey on the table a quarter turn, then another quarter turn, as a man turns over a fact he had not previously held. "And my uncle?" "Your uncle knew. Your uncle approved. Your uncle paid, in fact, for the new lock on the gallery door. It was the last bill he signed before his last illness. He would not have it set down in any ledger I kept. He paid the locksmith out of his own purse and asked me, on his honor, to keep the boy safe until you came." Adam looked at her across the table. The morning light through the gatehouse window had broken at last through the grey, and a single bar of pale autumn gold lay on the table between them, between the bread and the honey, and the third cup that was Tobias's. She looked back. Her chin was lifted. The brass key at her throat caught the light and held it. "He could have written to me." "He could have. He did not. He said, when I pressed him, that a duke who inherits a curse should be allowed to meet it on his own ground, and decide for himself." Adam laughed, once, low. The laugh was not bitter. It was the laugh of a nephew who had begun, very late, to understand an uncle who had loved him at a distance. He was a careful man. He was a careful man. I begin to like him. You would have liked him, Adam. He would have liked you. He was sorry, at the end, that he had not known you better. I told him you were 10 years old when he last saw you. He said that 10 years old was a poor age at which to be judged a stranger to one's own house, and he was sorry for it. And he was taken from us on a Tuesday. On a Tuesday. Adam set his bread down. I will go up to the chapel this afternoon, Cordelia, and I will sit with him for a quarter of an hour, if you will tell me where the stone is. I will show you. And after the hearing, if we have a hearing left to win, we will set the portrait in the gallery to face the room again, the one with the turned head. She looked at him for a long moment. Her hand came across the table and rested, briefly, on his wrist where it lay on the wood. 2 seconds. 3. She withdrew it.
Yes, she said. We will.
They left for London on the Tuesday in 2 carriages, one for them, one for the Boxes and Mrs. Penhaligon, who would not be left behind. And they reached the Strand by the Thursday evening. The inn was the King's Head. Pettigrew had taken 3 rooms, one for the Duke, one for Mrs. Penhaligon and Cordelia, one for the manservant. The corridor was narrow. The candles in the wall sconces burned low. The autumn rain was on the roof tiles overhead in a steady, soft drumming that did not lift all night. Adam undressed by his own fire. He hung the indigo coat over the chair. He folded the cravat she had set right with her own hand a week ago, onto the table beside the candle. He sat down to write a letter to his old colonel. He could not write it. The pen made one mark on the page, a small black hook, and stopped. He set the pen down. He stood up. He paced to the window. The window looked out on a slate roof and a chimney pot, and beyond, the dark spire of a church he did not know the name of. The rain ran down the slate in long, bright lines. He paced back. He sat down. He stood up again. He had crossed the breadth of his room 4 times before he understood, with the small, impatient self-knowledge of a soldier, that he was not pacing because of the Chancery hearing. He was pacing because there was a wall, 3 feet of plaster and lath, between his fire and hers, and because he had stood in a carriage doorway at the King's Head 2 hours ago and watched her cross the inn-yard with her travelling cloak on her arm and her chin lifted against the wet, and because he had wanted, with an honesty that had startled him, to take the cloak from her and put it on her shoulders himself. At length, he opened his door and stepped out into the corridor, because he had remembered that he had not, at supper, returned the small bound book of estate accounts Cordelia had pressed into his hand on the carriage step, and it would be wanted in the morning. He did not knock at her door. He did not need to. She was already in the corridor. She had a candle in her hand. She was in a wrap of dark wool over her nightdress. Her auburn hair was down. He had not, until that moment, seen it down, and it fell over her shoulder in a long, dark honey rope to her waist. The corridor was narrow enough that he could see, in the low light of the wall sconce, the small frown of concentration she wore when she was listening for a sound she did not quite trust. She had come out, she said, because she had heard his step, and had thought he was the manservant, and had wished to ask whether he had locked the outer door of the corridor, because the inn was full and the corridor opened in the daytime onto a public stair. "I have not locked it," he said. "I will." "Thank you." She did not go back into her room. He did not move toward the outer door. They stood in the narrow corridor, with 2 candles between them and the rain on the tiles overhead, and the brass key, he saw, still at her throat over the wrap. He had not, until that moment, realized she slept in it. "You sleep in the key," he said. "I have slept in it for 2 years, Your Grace." Adam. Adam. "You will not need to, after the 14th. "No?" "No. After the 14th, the key will hang somewhere a key ought to hang, on a hook by the library door, where any honest housekeeper might find it." Her mouth softened. The candle in her hand trembled, just once.
Good night, Adam.
Good night, Cordelia. She did not, at once, turn back to her room. She stood with the candle in her hand, and her hair down, and the brass key at her throat, over the wool wrap. And she looked at him, in a way that was not yet a question, and was not yet an answer, and that asked him only to look back. He looked back. The rain on the tiles overhead was steady. The candle in her hand bent a little toward the candle in his, and steadied. Somewhere below, in the inn yard, an ostler called out to another ostler and laughed, and a horse stamped, and the small sounds of a London inn at midnight came up to them through the floorboards. He did not move. She did not move. After what he afterwards calculated to have been the better part of a minute, a long minute by any measure, she lifted her chin in the small, almost smiling way he had now seen her lifted 8 or 9 times since the harvest dinner, and she stepped back through her door, and she closed it without sound. He stood in the corridor a moment longer, with both candles between his ribs, as it were, and then he walked the 4 paces to the outer door, and he locked it, with a very steady hand and a heart that was not, by any measure he had carried into a Spanish hillside, entirely steady. He came back past her room. Her door was already closed. He laid his palm, briefly, against the wood of it. He did not knock. He did not even press. And then he went to his own room and slept, against expectation, the deep, clean sleep of a soldier on the eve of a battle he intended to win. The clerk at Chancery on the Friday morning was a thin man with a kind eye and a powerful grasp of what was, and was not, irregular in a will. He read Pettigrew's draft. He read Thrace's counter. He read the marriage clause. He laid down his pen, looked over his spectacles at Adam and Cordelia, and Pettigrew sat in a row across his desk, and said quietly, "I see no reason to hurry the inspection. I see, in fact, several reasons to set the date back a fortnight. The 14th is unsuitable. I propose the 28th. Lord Mortimer's witnesses will keep." Pettigrew bowed. Adam inclined his head. Cordelia did not move. Outside, in the cold court, the autumn wind threw a flurry of fallen leaves against the window, and Adam understood, with a small, clean satisfaction, that they had bought another 14 days, and that 14 days, in the hands of Cordelia Vale, was a long time. They drove back to Raven's Hollow through the night. The carriage lamps threw 2 yellow pools on the dark road. Mrs. Penhaligon slept upright in the corner, with her bonnet over her eyes. Cordelia sat opposite Adam. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was turned to the window. He watched her for a long time without speaking. At a milestone past midnight, she turned from the window and met his eyes. "You are staring, Your Grace." "I am." "I know. Forgive me." "I do not require forgiveness for it." The wheels of the carriage went over a rut. The lamps swung. Mrs. Penhaligon did not stir. Cordelia's hand came across the small space between them and rested, briefly, on the back of his wrist, where it lay on his knee. 2 seconds. 3. Then it withdrew. "Adam." "Cordelia." "I should not have done that." "I am glad you did." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she turned her face to the window again, and the carriage carried them home through the autumn dark. They reached Ravenshollow at 2 in the morning. The mist had come down again over the home meadow. The gatehouse was dark. Tobias would be asleep, and the manor showed one lit window in the west wing, where Cordelia had left a lamp burning for Mrs. Penhaligon's stair. Adam handed the older woman down. He handed Cordelia down. The grooms led the horses away. The driver took the carriage round to the coach-house. The 3 of them came up the gravel together to the front door. Mrs. Penhaligon went straight up the front stair to her own room, with a brisk good night. Adam and Cordelia stood for a moment in the hall. The fire had been banked. A single candle burned on the side table. The portrait in the long gallery, somewhere above them, was watching the wall as it had watched it for 50 years. "I will go up," Cordelia said. "I will see you up." She did not refuse him. They went up the stair together. At the head of the stair, they turned along the gallery toward her room. Halfway along, she stopped, because her foot had caught on the edge of a rug, and she put out her hand to steady herself. And his hand was there. He did not let go of it. She did not take it back. They stood for a long moment with their hands joined on the gallery, the portraits watching the opposite wall, the brass key at her throat, catching the candlelight in a small, steady gleam. He had carried her hand without thinking. He had not, he now noticed, intended to put it down. "Your room," he said quietly. "Yes." He raised her hand. He turned it. He pressed his mouth, very briefly, to the inside of her wrist, where the pulse ran under the thin skin, and he set the hand down again. "Good night, Cordelia." "Good night, Adam." She went into her room. He did not move from the gallery for some time. When at last he went to his own door, he found that he was smiling, and that he had not smiled, in that particular way, for a great many years. They prepared for the Chancery hearing through the second week of November, as a regiment prepares for ground it has chosen. Cordelia copied the relevant pages of the household ledgers into a fair, clean hand, 3 evenings running, by a single beeswax candle at the great oak desk in the library, while Adam sat across from her and read aloud the passages of Pettigrew's brief he wished her to know by heart. She knew them by the second reading. She corrected him, twice, on a date. He was not insulted. He was, in a private way he did not yet share, proud. On the Sunday before the journey, she walked with him to the chapel in the home meadow and showed him the stone of the late Duke. The stone was plain. The lettering was sharp and new. Adam stood with his hat in his hand for a quarter of an hour without speaking. When at last he spoke, it was to thank his uncle, very quietly, for the trouble he had taken on a nephew he had scarcely known. Cordelia stood 3 paces behind him and did not interrupt. The autumn light through the chapel window threw a long yellow square across the flagstones at his feet. A robin sang once in the yew outside, the small, bright, sober song of November, and was answered by another robin further off, and the chapel was as quiet, after that, as it had ever been. They left for London on the Monday morning at first light. The carriage was the same. The road was the same. Mrs. Penhaligon, this time, came too, with a basket of cold mutton and a small flask of brandy for emergencies of weather or temper. There were no emergencies. The ride was uneventful. They reached the Strand by Wednesday evening. Pettigrew met them at the King's Head with a long face and a short report. Master Coldstream, in his chambers that afternoon, had read every paper twice and asked 3 questions, and made no mark his clerk could read. Adam said this was the mark of a good judge. Pettigrew, who had appeared before Master Coldstream 11 times, agreed. The Chancery hearing on the 28th of November opened at 10 in the morning in a high-panelled court off Chancery Lane. The court was cold. The fire in the hearth had been laid late, and the panelling threw the small light back without warming it. A clerk in a frayed black gown trimmed 3 pen nibs with a small steel pen trimmer at the master's table and laid them in a row, as a man lays out cutlery before a long meal. Lord Mortimer Thrace sat with 2 solicitors and 3 witnesses on the right-hand bench. He had dressed for the court, a pale grey coat cut very fine, a pearl pin in the cravat, the fair hair brushed forward in the new fashion, and he wore the small, polished smile of a man who had been told by his counsel that the morning would go well. Adam sat with Pettigrew on the left, Cordelia at his side, in the dark bronze travelling silk she had worn the night he had arrived at Ravenshollow. She had pinned a small spray of dried lavender from the manor garden at her collar. The brass key was hidden under the silk. The seal was in the linen pouch at her wrist. The narrow black ledger was in the reticule on her other wrist, and her ink-stained hand rested on the reticule as quietly as a hand rests on a sleeping cat. The Chancery clerk had been replaced, since Friday, by a senior master in robes, Master Coldstream, a dry, narrow, painstaking man who was said to have once spent 11 years on a single boundary case, and to have, at the end of it, decided correctly. Pettigrew opened. He set out the late Duke's will. He set out the marriage clause. He set out the late Duke's testamentary capacity, attested by 3 witnesses, including the rector of Ravenshollow Parish and the family physician. He set out, in dry, chronological order, every objection Lord Mortimer's counsel had filed, and the answer to it. He sat down. Lord Mortimer's counsel rose. He was a sleek, polished man with a voice that carried without effort. He spoke for 40 minutes. He suggested that the marriage clause was, in effect, a coercion. A clause of a kind, he said, that the Chancery had on 3 occasions in the last decade declined to enforce, when its drafting could be shown to have been the work of the beneficiary rather than the testator. He cited the 3 occasions. He read the relevant passages. He suggested that Miss Vale, the woman entrusted with the seal, had exerted, in the late Duke's last months, an undue influence, that she had been the only person present at the drafting of the codicil, that she had been the witness to 2 of the 3 signatures, that her hand was visible in the marginal notes. He suggested, delicately, with the air of a man pained to suggest it, that certain irregularities in the household accounts during the late Duke's final illness might bear examination, and that the absence, from the public ledgers, of any wages paid to Miss Vale herself for the last 18 months was, taken together with the size of the estate she would shortly come into by marriage, a coincidence of a kind that the Chancery had been known to find suggestive. He sat down. The pearl pin at Lord Mortimer's throat caught the light from the high window. He folded his hands in his lap, with the small, contented composure of a man who has, in his own estimation, just laid a careful net across a careful door. Pettigrew rose to answer. Adam laid a hand, briefly, on Pettigrew's sleeve and looked at Cordelia. She had not moved. Her chin was lifted. The lavender at her collar trembled, just once, with the movement of her breath, and steadied. Pettigrew, when he rose at last, was brief. He did not address the 3 cited cases. He had read them, he said, and the late Duke had read them in his last summer, in his own library, and the codicil had been drafted with their precise language in mind. He did not address the marginal notes. The marginal notes, he said, were Miss Vale's, because the late Duke had dictated them when his hand could no longer hold a pen, and the family physician would, if required, attest that this had been the case from August onwards. He did not address the wages. The wages, he said, were a matter Miss Vale herself would speak to. He sat down. Master Coldstream looked over his spectacles. Miss Vale. Cordelia rose. She did not look at Lord Mortimer. She did not look at the public bench. She looked at the master. Sir. The lavender at her collar trembled once, with a small movement of her breath, and steadied. Her hand on the reticule was perfectly still. Adam, who had once watched a Spanish gunner stand to attention through a quarter hour of a colonel's anger without a muscle moving, recognized the discipline. He did not, however, betray that he had recognized it. He kept his eyes on Master Coldstream. You hold the seal of Ravenshollow? I do, sir. Will you produce it? She drew a small linen pouch from the reticule on her wrist. She untied the string. She set the seal, heavy bronze, the falcons stooping, on the master's desk. The master inspected it. He compared it to the impression on the will in front of him. He inclined his head, fractionally, and slid it back to her across the desk. Counsel for Lord Mortimer has suggested irregularities in the household accounts. Have you the books here? I have, sir. She turned. Pettigrew lifted, from the bench beside him, 3 bound volumes and laid them on the master's desk. The master opened the topmost. He turned 3 pages. He turned 30. He looked up. These appear to be in order, Miss Vale. They are in order, sir. The master turned another page. The thin sound of paper on paper was, in the stillness of the panelled court, very loud. The clerk in the frayed black gown made a small note on a folio at his elbow. A pigeon outside the high window struck the leaded glass with its wing in passing, and was gone. Counsel for Lord Mortimer has further suggested that no wages were paid to you over the last 18 months. Will you address it? I will, sir. No wages were paid. I asked the late Duke, in February of last year, that my wages be set against the cost of the slate roof on the south barn, which was failing, and which the estate could not that quarter afford to mend. He agreed. The arrangement is recorded in the household ledger at folio 143, witnessed by Mrs. Penhaligon, the late housekeeper of this manor. I have continued the arrangement of my own account since the late Duke's last illness, because there has been a sequence of similar small needs, and no one to ask. I have not, sir, taken a shilling from this estate that did not return to it threefold in standing timber, repaired stone, or honest seed. The books will bear the inspection. They will bear it. I have inspected them. Sit, Miss Vale. With the master's permission, there is one further matter. Counsel for Lord Mortimer, said the master without raising his voice, will perhaps explain on what evidence he has suggested otherwise. Lord Mortimer's counsel rose. He hesitated. He glanced sidelong at his client. On information, sir, supplied to my chambers. By whom? A longer hesitation. The counsel did not look at his client. He looked at the inkwell on the master's desk, and then, having found no answer there, at the panelling above the master's head. By a former employee of the estate, sir. Name? Lord Mortimer himself rose. He smiled the small, polished smile. Master, with respect. The witness's name was given in confidence. We are not required to— You are required, Lord Mortimer, in this court, to substantiate any suggestion of irregularity made on the record. I will have the name of your witness, or I will have your counsel's withdrawal of the suggestion. You may choose. A silence. Lord Mortimer's smile thinned. His pale eyes flicked, once, to Cordelia. They did not find what they had hoped for there. She was looking at the master. My client, said the counsel quietly, withdraws the suggestion. Noted. The master made a small mark in his book. Miss Vale, you may sit. She did not sit. Master Coldstream looked over his spectacles. Miss Vale. There is a second ledger, sir. A private ledger, kept by the late Duke and continued by myself at his instruction. It records certain payments made by Lord Mortimer to a clerk in Pettigrew's chambers, beginning in March and continuing through July of this year, in consideration, as the entries set out, of advance copies of correspondence relating to the will. The ledger is in my reticule. I had not intended to produce it unless required. I believe I am now required. The court did not move. Lord Mortimer's smile did not move either, but the colour beneath it changed. Miss Vale, said the master quietly. Produce the ledger. She produced it. A narrow black book, the size of a prayer book. She set it on the desk. The master opened it. He read for 2 full minutes in silence. He turned 3 pages. He read for another minute. He looked up. Counsel for Lord Mortimer. The counsel rose. His face was the colour of his collar. Sir, your client's petition is dismissed with costs. The will of the late Duke stands in every particular, including the marriage clause. The marriage may proceed at the convenience of the parties, and the seal of Ravenshollow will pass, on the day of the marriage, into the joint custody of the Duke and the Duchess, as the late Duke intended. The matter of the suborned clerk in your chambers will be referred to the inn for disciplinary inquiry. Lord Mortimer will perhaps wish to confer with his counsel before any further communication with this court. Good morning. The master rose. The court rose. Lord Mortimer stood very still while his counsel gathered the papers around him with hands that had gone, suddenly, clumsy. He did not look at Adam. He did not look at Cordelia. He went out of the panelled court without a word, and the heavy door closed behind him, and the matter, after 7 months, was over. Pettigrew turned to Adam in the corridor outside the court and said, with an unprofessional warmth, that he had been at the Chancery Bar for 31 years, and had not, in any of them, watched a petition undone in a cleaner half-hour. Adam shook his hand. He did not, at that moment, trust himself to speak. Cordelia, beside him, took the hand Pettigrew offered her and held it a moment longer than was customary, and Pettigrew bowed to her with the small, sincere bow that lawyers reserve for clients who have, against the run of play, made their cases for them. In the carriage home, Cordelia laid her head, just for a moment, against the side of the carriage and closed her eyes. The autumn light through the window was the colour of weak tea. The wheels beat steady on the road. Mrs. Ben Halligan, this time, was not with them. She had stayed in town to visit a sister, and the carriage was very quiet.
Cordelia.
Adam.
The carriage lamp in its bracket above the door swung gently with the road. The light it threw across her face moved with it. A slow, yellow stroke, then shadow, then yellow again. And he watched the light on her cheekbone, and the tired hollow under her eye, and the small, new line at the corner of her mouth that had not been there in October. And he understood, without being told, what 18 months of carrying a black book under a pillow looked like, in the face of a woman who did not, on principle, complain. You had that ledger in your reticule from the moment we left Ravenshollow. I had it, in fact, in my reticule from June. She did not open her eyes. I have carried it on my person at all hours since the day I copied the last entry. I slept with it under my pillow. I bathed with it in a covered basket beside the tub. I would not have produced it unless he forced me. He forced me. He did. Good. She opened her eyes. She turned her head on the carriage cushion and looked at him. The carriage went over a stretch of bad road. The wheels jolted. She did not look away. He did not either. After a long moment, he leaned across the small space between them and set his mouth very gently on hers. She did not pull back. She set one hand lightly against his jaw. The brass key, in the dim of the carriage, brushed his knuckle as it had brushed her own knuckle in the library a fortnight ago. Her mouth was warm. The wool of her travelling cloak smelled of lavender and wood smoke and the cold autumn air of the inn-yard. Her hair, pinned high for the court, had loosened in 2 places at the temple, and one strand fell against his cheek as she leaned into him, and he felt, with the small, exact attention of a man who had spent the last 2 months noticing everything about her, that she was no longer shaking. The kiss was brief. It was decided. It was not the kiss of a man who had been overwhelmed. It was the kiss of a man who had, after due consideration, made a choice and intended to stand by it. When he drew back, he did not draw far. Their foreheads touched. He could feel her breath against his mouth. I have wished to do that, he said quietly. Since the harvest dinner. I have wished it, she said. Since the second night. He drew back another small fraction, so that he could see her face. The carriage lamp moved its slow yellow stroke across her cheek again. Her eyes were open now, hazel gone honey in the low light, and they did not look away from his. The second night. When you sat with me on the gallery stair and asked me about the estate and not the marriage. A wheel went over a stone. The carriage lurched and steadied. Neither of them noticed it, except in the small adjustment of his hand at her shoulder. Cordelia. Adam. She kissed him this time. Her hand stayed against his jaw. The brass key swung between them and was, for the first time, not the most important thing in the carriage. Outside, the autumn fields rolled past in a slow grey blur. The carriage carried them home. They were married 3 weeks later, on a clear, cold morning in the small parish church at Ravenshollow, with the rector officiating and 40 tenants in the pews, and Mrs. Penhallogan weeping discreetly in the second row, and Tobias, Mr. Holloway now, by every paper that mattered, standing as Cordelia's brother, in plain view of the congregation, because Adam had said quietly that he would not have his wife married out of a back door of her own family. The rector had agreed. The parish, to its faint surprise, had agreed too. Old Mr. Halloran the cooper had said, sober for once, that he had always supposed there was a cousin somewhere, and the matter had been considered settled. Cordelia wore amber, the colour of late autumn light through a leaded window. The brass key was not at her throat. It hung, that morning, on a hook by the library door at the Manor, where she had put it the night before with her own hand, because she had said, quite seriously, that a wife should not be married in a key. The night before the wedding, Adam had taken her, by the hand, into the long gallery. The portrait of his great-grandfather had hung for 50 years, with its face turned away from the painter. He had asked a London restorer, the week after the Chancery hearing, whether the turn was original to the canvas, or whether the canvas had been turned in the frame at some later date. The restorer had unframed it carefully on a Tuesday, and reframed it on the Wednesday. And the face of a young man with grey eyes and a soldier's jaw, had come round to look out of the gallery, as it had been painted to do. He had not told Cordelia. He had wished her to find it. She found it now. She stopped in the middle of the gallery. She lifted the candle. She looked up. The grey eyes of his great-grandfather looked back. The room was warm, with the breath of the beeswax candles burning, as they had burned every night for 50 years, in the brass branch on the side table. Outside, the autumn dark pressed against the windows. Adam. He wished, Adam said quietly. To be looked at, I think, after all. She did not turn from the portrait. The brass key, still at her throat that night, for the last time, caught the candlelight. Adam. Cordelia. The candle in her hand bent in a draught from the high gallery window and steadied. The beeswax candles in the brass branch on the side table, the candles that had been lit every night for 50 years by a sequence of hands she had been the last of, bent with it and steadied with it. The grey eyes of his great-grandfather looked down out of the new-faced portrait. The long gallery did not move. It had been waiting, in its own slow, patient way, for a long time. I love you. He came to stand behind her. He set his hand at her waist. He did not turn her to face him. He spoke at her ear. I love you, he said. I have loved you since the morning you set out the ledgers and told me the estate was bankrupt and asked me, with the lift of your chin, to dismiss you. I will love you, Cordelia, when there is no estate, and no chancery, and no portrait, and no key. I will love you in the kitchen garden in February with the frost on the cabbages. I will love you in the south field in August with the wheat coming in. I will love you, Cordelia Vale, in every weather this house is ever asked to stand. She turned in his arm. The candle in her hand tipped just a little. He caught it. He set it down on the side table beside the brass branch. He took her face in both his hands, and he kissed her under the eyes of his great-grandfather and the steady light of 40 years of beeswax, and the long gallery, which had seen a great many things in its time, and concealed most of them, saw this one, and let it stand. 6 months later, it was spring at Ravenshollow. The home meadow was green to the willows. The orchard at the foot of the kitchen garden was in full white bloom. Pear and apple and a single old cherry, which had not flowered in 3 years and had decided, this year, to flower for everyone. A wood pigeon called from the long ridge. The south field was sown. The slate roof on the south barn had been mended in February, with timber from a different wood than the upper one, which had been allowed to grow back. The estate was solvent. The estate, indeed, was beginning to be prosperous. In the gatehouse beyond the orchard, no one lived. Tobias Holloway had taken up residence at Holloway in March, and had written, twice, about the grazing. The second letter had asked, with painful casualness, whether his cousin the Duke might happen to know a young woman in the Bristol neighbourhood who would not object to a quiet tea with a young man who read and drew. The Duke had laughed for a full minute over the letter, and had written back that he would make inquiries. The brass key on the black ribbon hung by the library door. Cordelia, when she went out into the kitchen garden in the morning with her basket on her arm, no longer carried it. She no longer needed to. The east wing door was unlocked. The portrait in the long gallery looked at the room. The east bedchamber had been given to a guest who was expected for Easter. Adam's old colonel, with whom he had served in Spain, and who had written that he was bringing a daughter of marriageable age, and a sense of humour about it. Adam had read this letter aloud at breakfast. Cordelia had laughed. Mrs. Penhaligon had begun, that very morning, to air the east bedchamber. On a Sunday afternoon in late April, Adam came in from the south field with mud on his boots and the indigo riding coat over his arm, and found Cordelia in the library, at the great oak desk, with the household ledgers open in front of her. She was in a green morning dress, the colour of the new grass. Her auburn hair was pinned up. Her ink-stained fingers held the pen. The brass key on its black ribbon hung, where it had hung now for 6 months, on the hook beside the library door. She looked up. She set down the pen. "You are early, Your Grace." "I am early, Your Grace." She rose. She came round the desk. She set her hand against his coat, careless of the mud, and lifted her face. He kissed her, briefly, and set his forehead against hers. "The south field is sown." "I heard." He set the indigo coat over the back of a chair. The smell of the fresh-turned earth came off it, faint and clean. The smell of a field that had been waited for through a long winter, and would not, this year, disappoint. "The pear is in flower." "I saw it from the window." She came round to face him. The pen had left a small new stain on the second knuckle of her right hand. A habit 12 years old by now, and one she would not, he understood, be giving up. "The Colonel writes that he will be here on Thursday." "Mrs. Penhaligon has aired the room." A wood-pigeon called from the long ridge beyond the orchard, the slow, soft, 3-note call of a bird that had decided, after a long winter, to stay through summer. Cordelia tilted her head a fraction toward the window, listening, and lowered it again. "Then there is nothing," he said, "left to do this afternoon." "Nothing at all." He looked over her shoulder at the open ledger. The columns marched down the page in her clear, exact hand. The estate was solvent. The estate was, in fact, prosperous. The brass key hung by the door, where any honest housekeeper might find it. Outside, a wood-pigeon called from the long ridge. The autumn was a long way behind them. The mist on the home meadow was a long way behind them. The portrait in the long gallery looked at the room, and the room looked back. "Cordelia." "Adam." "Walk with me to the orchard. The cherries in flower." "In a moment, let me close the book." She did not, at once, close the book. She set her hand flat across the open page, as a person sets a palm on a sleeping animal to keep it sleeping a moment longer. The light through the library window had shifted to the warm yellow of late April afternoon. It lay in a long bar across the desk, and the hand and the brass key on its hook by the door, and the man in his shirt-sleeves, with mud still on his boots. And it did not, he thought, distinguish between any of them. "You always close the book." "I always close the book." He laughed, low. He came round the desk to her side. He set his hand over hers on the page briefly and lifted it. "You will close it the same way in 20 years. I will close it the same way in 50, Adam, if you are good to me." "I intend," he said, "to be good to you." "I know." The pen in its tray rolled a half-inch and stilled. The columns of her hand marched down the page in the careful, unembellished script of a woman who had been keeping books since she had been 13. He looked at them. He looked at her. He had known both now for a year and a half, and he was content, on this Sunday in April, to know them both for the rest of his life. "I have intended it since the carriage." Since the carriage. Since before the carriage. Since the harvest dinner. "You will not let me forget the harvest dinner. I will not let you forget anything that has gone well between us. We will need it on the days that go badly." "There will be days that go badly." "There will be a great many." She turned her hand under his, palm up, and let his palm rest against hers a moment without closing the fingers. The brass key on its hook beside the door was still. The wood-pigeon called once more from the long ridge, and was quiet. "And on those days?" "On those days, she said. "You will come in from the south field, and I will be at the desk, and the brass key will be on its hook by the door, and we will close the book together, and we will go and look at whatever is in flower." "That is a long promise, Cordelia." "It is the only kind worth making." She turned. She closed the ledger. She set the pen in its tray. She took the brass key from its hook by the library door, and she did not put it on. She put it in his palm. She closed his fingers over it. "For safekeeping," she said, "while we walk." He looked at her. He smiled. "For safekeeping," he agreed. They went out together through the kitchen garden in the spring light, and the brass key warm in his hand was not a noose, and not a debt, and not a curse. It was a key. It opened a cabinet in a library in a house that he had inherited, and a wife who, as the title page of his life had warned him, had known every secret of it, and had told him, at last, all the ones that mattered. If this story warmed your evening, subscribe to Adrian's Fireside Stories for a new tale every week.